construction technology world. I was heading up, when I first met Dr. Julian here, I was heading up Director of Innovation and Strategic Planning at a construction materials company called Datacrete. It's a global producer of mostly flooring materials, but some other ones as well. And we were looking into how digitalization is going to change the industry, and then how is it going to impact the company. We came up with a couple pillars of automation, so automation and robotics for installations, digitalization underneath the floors of smart flooring, and then just general back of house integration and to the selling cycle with new softwares and tools. And the flagship project really became 3D construction printing. And then here during the pandemic, I shifted towards a startup called Icon, who's the world leader right now in construction 3D printing. It's a hypergrowth startup, has raised over 450 million US dollars. And yeah, we have very, very big, large, ambitious goals, but we printed over 24 homes around the world. And it's like an experience like no other. Seeing a company grow from 30 employees to now almost 500, or about 500 right now. And just the challenges and really the trade-offs that you make as a startup, and then how you make decisions is quite different. So currently I'm heading up what we call material operations, which is looking at the construction material we're using, our print medium, composition, production, and getting it to the job site in the most innovative, productive way to scale the technology.
With that, how can you print a whole house? How does that work? Yeah.
So very simply, it's think of XYZ coordinates. So it's the computer taking the design of the home and saying, breaking it down into layers, and then saying deposit this material in this location. And then we print layer by layer, and these layers fuse together to form a monolithic wall. So as the layers are stacked up, you start to see the frame of a house. So what technically we print is the formwork, or positive formwork. It's left behind and becomes the structural entity, which is the house. There's other trades that need to come into it, but the big so what of this is two things, really, in my opinion. One, we're tangibilizing the housing product. So typically, the idea of real estate in most places is the land depreciates while the land appreciates while your housing product falls apart. With 3D printed home, you know exactly, you have a complete bill of materials for what is the house, and that's separate from the land. And then the other thing is that digitalization process also creates a platform where you have a delivered as built matching the design, and that means all the other trades can come in after, and we can integrate with prefab or other automation aspects and complete the whole process, compressing the schedule.
Sounds already like an ecosystem game. We'll come to that point later when we talk about cooperation partners, but maybe we start a little bit broader, because that was what we had also in our pre-discussion, and I like this discussion, and I would like to bring it also into this session. We talked about the recession. We talked about crisis all over the world. We in Europe, we have still the big war ongoing in Ukraine. We have a dramatic recession driven also due to that, but also to other reasons. We have inflation and all of that. So sometimes we are wondering, are we always in the crisis mode? And we have, of course, the pandemic still maybe coming back in autumn and winter. So all of that. One could assume that now companies would just focus back on their core competencies and just act egoistic and act in the old way in terms of just optimizing their own operations. Whereas, and that was your opinion, and maybe you can elaborate on that, you think, no, it's now the time of opening up, of collaboration, of ecosystems more than ever. How does that come together? What are your reasons behind that, assuming that?
Yeah. So I think innovation is something that it's always an uncomfortable place to be. People,
that's a good statement.
People are always adverse to change. So the beauty for me of the pandemic, and I mean, I don't want to say the war is beautiful or anything in the crises around the world. But the silver lining, if you will, is that it's forcing change that was long overdue, and people are looking at the core competencies, but also in a general sense, in the ecosystemizer sense of what is the service that they're providing, what are people really buying, and understanding not just core competencies and what do we produce economically well, like yes, we have efficiencies, but core competencies and what is the end user actually getting in satisfaction wise. And I think another thing for me, this really where my mind was at early on in the pandemic, was crisis is not new.
So I agree. The question is still, when I see managers, often managers in crisis times, they just look at their cost base and they think, okay, now maybe our sales go down. Now, what do? We just have a look at our costs and make or set up cost efficiency programs. What would you tell them now if you meet such a person?
Yeah, so to give a shout out and support for the Ecosystemizer, for me, it's sort of a source of truth. And that truth is, again, the service that the company is really providing and who is involved in that process. And when you really break it down, it should be evident. I mean, unless you really are in dire situations where you have to cut to make way just for today, the guiding light of the Ecosystemizer is a structure to say, hey, this is the path we're on, and you're going to have to, you either believe in it or you don't. And if you believe you're on the right direction, I think financially you'll find a way to make it happen. Again, there are some companies that did have insane losses and really had to make drastic cuts just to survive, but I don't think that was the majority of the companies. And with the government support and other changes, I think if people really have this truth of what they're offering, then they shouldn't be making the short-term sacrifices for the long-term vision. We're starting to see a lot of startups here in the US that are making those drastic pivots because, again, back to the Ecosystemizer, the source of truth was not honest, in my opinion.
I mean, many companies are scared of new technology or don't know how to integrate them. And of course, this is an opener for corporations, as I would assume. So, how do you see that? Which role does technology or do new technologies play in partnering and also in ecosystem corporations? Is it just necessary to open up because we have these new technologies, or how do you see that technology aspect?
So my philosophy, I'm not sure, I'll butcher the quote, but it's something like, in the science world, we say, for a new breakthrough to happen, the incumbent leaders, the scientific community, have to die. So you have to kind of phase out the incumbent approach and phase in these new ways of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason I say this, and one of the answers, how I'm answering the question, is really around the fear of the incumbent is often quite strong, and we don't want to lose anything we have in hand to adopt a new technology. So that's and that's also seen as the sales structure. So a lot of salespeople say, "Well, this customer is happy, right?" And then if you go one level beneath that, why we're seeing these fears is because when a lot of new technology is sold, it's always sold. So I'm a more cynical, critical person, less of this over-optimist type. And for me, the thing that we often not talk about is who's the loser.
Mm-hmm.
So even with 3D printing, let's just say we can deliver a house at half the cost. But if we sell the printer to the same contractor that's building the house in the same way, now he has a tool that he can just simply pocket twice the profit margin. So there's nothing incentivizing them to really change.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at new technology, in my opinion, we always have to look at who's going to lose out from this automation or from this great savings that's offered. And then that, to me, will give you the key to the correct path. Because if you're not mitigating for who's going to lose out, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be pushback.
And in that context, how can startups help to bring new technologies in? I mean, maybe in a little bit broader context. So are startups maybe a good starting point when I, as a corporate manager, think about new business models with new technologies, and how would you what would you recommend how to set that up?
So following this source of truth, back to this idea, startups are a hedge against those barriers to entry or disruptions to the market. So not to say that some startups will develop into functioning businesses. I don't know the breakdown. My gut tells me that majority of startups will be absorbed, consolidated, and merged into existing corporations or existing supply chains.
That's the case where the founders are striving for, at least some of them or many of them.
It's also the quickest way to return the capital that was invested, right? So if you're think on the other side of the spectrum with dividends or just getting little payouts over time. This is for the whole world, the venture world is structured on getting that big payout within that 5 or 10 year portfolio. So that's the quickest way back. And so the real value of the startup to the big corporates is to say, if I were to do this myself, it would cause X and Y disruptions. If I'd go hedge my bets and put my bets on a startup, I can separate myself, isolate myself from that those disruptions, and hopefully, if it's done correctly, again, there has to be some honesty or honesty of yourself and your offering, because if not, sometimes those gears are just spinning at two far different speeds, and the integration is basically the startup has to be shredded apart to find anything that's actually integratable. But then again, it's a hard balance because also the startups require this over optimism to get through that initial breakthrough point. So yeah, you can't. There's no universal rule. It's each scenario is different. But for me, I would look back to what are going to be those big apprehension points to integrate this new technology, and then the corporate can understand how isolated they want to be from that startup.
And when you look back at your experience with Let It Create, is corporate, and now your current startup, so are there any examples where you have some good experiences with corporations between both sides, or is it something which takes time, which has high risk?
In my experience in the corporate world, it's the example of steering the large ship versus the jet ski that's contained, right? And what does that mean? It really means, from the manufacturing perspective, linearized demand. And that linearized demand, you can have very sound metrics around efficiency within production, growth within markets, etc. And though that linearized demand then creates these processes that do really focus on that optimization aspects, and those things are beautiful additions to startups when they can kind of outsource where they need to be efficient and keep in-house the core breakthrough technology. Advising for a company right now, to give it an example, it's a automated grouting company. So for tile applications, they're building a robot just to automate the grouting aspect. Eventually, the platform can grow to automate other aspects of construction robotics, but why grouting is it's hyper-focused on this one task. But then finding the right strategic partner is working with the corporates and having access to their labs so that the material is calibrated perfectly. And there's a lot of unknowns that we don't know from the material side. There's a lot of logistics on the supply chain side to get the material to the right customer. So integrating in with the corporates that have very established procedures and pathways for this. But then when it comes to the actual installation, that's where the startup is hyper focused on this single task. And in regards to automation, this is really everything I've read is it's repeating task oriented. So brain surgery will be automated before you see a complete automated burger flipper, because that burger flipper is also responsible to clean the front end of the restaurant. So this task automation, and again leveraging what the corporate does well and what they don't, is really the foundation to building a good, solid ecosystem.
So now you actually made the bridge to my pre-ultimate question, because we are almost going to have a look at the time at the end. And that is the question to the outlook. So because my perspective, also driven by research, driven by our frameworks, is that we have a total blurring of industries and maybe not a competition anymore, company against company, but rather ecosystem against ecosystem. And of course, there should be brands and ecosystem brands and companies who are forming these ecosystems, which are forming these ecosystems. But which is your perspective? Maybe with two directions. First, for the construction industry, where you are at, and which you know probably more than many people on this planet from the sides you described, but also in general. So in 5 to 10 years, how will the competition look like? Can you there describe your vision or your imagination?
Okay, yeah. So from the construction industry, let's start there. Maybe not 10 years, maybe 10 years, we might start to see it. But again, the beauty of 3D printing is this as built is delivered matching the design. So conventionally in the past, there was always changes. There was always something that happened on the job site. and you didn't have this idea of source of truth. The house wasn't exactly the same. So being exactly the same and changing that you have a complete bill of materials for what the house is. Now we're going to start to see companies like IKEA that say, okay, well, I see your blueprints. I can match in and I can deliver not a standard piece of furniture, but I can have a CNC cut desk that fits exactly into your curved wall. The insurance company will then be able to write an actuary table based exactly off what your composition of the house is. What's the material? The next level will then be the city building resources and allocating resources around energy efficiency or water management, and then that will grow into the other ecosystems of. We saw it. Latercrete had a flooring product, for example, that would the floor heating would turn on based off your cell phone data when you're near the home, if you programmed it as such, and it saw that if you were in traffic, it would delay the turning on of the floor heating, so that way you're not consuming electricity when you don't need it. And this real-time complete analytics is going to be something that's just going to grow and grow and grow. So yeah, I think we're going to see many new ecosystem partners being the translators of this data into actionable business decisions. So the construction world is, again, the housing product and our interaction with it is going to change dramatically. The big thing that we're still trying to solve is really the life cycle. With technology, it's easy. Every 2 years, iPhone comes out with, it adds a new number. I don't think it's always sequential. I think they skip a couple here and there, but so it's easy. You throw away your old phone and you get a new one. With a house product, I mean, it's debatable how long we build for in the US, but in Europe, you definitely build for a longer time frame.
Sometimes 100 years, even more. Yeah.
So integrating in new technology products, this is going to be a challenge of aligning these two timeframes, because technology moves much quicker than buildings. So this is a big open one, but we are seeing more unification of the industry for sure. On a personal note, what I'm seeing around me, I guess from more like a consumer side, and really I would just reference towards more like authors like Yuval Harari in Sapiens, where I like what he's talking about, where the algorithms are getting to know us better than we know ourselves, and the predictions are spot on to what we want to consume. So this is already becoming evident and true, and I think this is just going to continue to expand. I think the biggest debate over the next 10 years is really going to be governmental organizations trying to rein in on the efficiency and accuracy of large tech, and we're going to see kind of privacy wars of, well, yes, it's more efficient, yes, it knows me better, but that's too much. So I think that the privacy wars is going to be the theme of the next 10 years as we these ecosystems, the interconnectedness of everything is really just now starting to show how true it is, how efficient it is, and how accurate, and how it's just a better way to get real-time data of what we should be selling.
So great thoughts, so many thoughts. I think the data and privacy thing is even worse for a particular session, I think, because it's has so many aspects to discuss. But maybe one counter remark, or not counter, one remark, because you mentioned Harari. I really like him. I like him not only for these thoughts about privacy and digital, but also for his very basic thoughts, which he also told in a TEDx talk. When you were telling why are human beings superior to any other species of the world, yeah, and like the basic derivation is because we are connecting to each other. We are not like just individuals focusing on our personal well-being, but we are integrating it, and actually we are born like ecosystem species, yeah. And so that's why it's also my ultimate question. Is there any ecosystem-related thing you have in your private life, or where you use or have an ecosystem mindset or thinking, taking this Harari claim into account?
Yeah, so and this one I give my wife credit for asking the provocative question of, or comment really, of our place determines what we consume, and being here in the pandemic with a lot of movement, housing prices going sky high, and inflation, and the idea of digital nomads, and just the changing kind of perception of how we love our governments or not, our countries. There's been a lot of thought, at least on this side, of where is the best place to raise our children and to live going the next 20, 30 years out. And this one is really the ecosystem question for us. Is it's interesting how a place really determines what you consume. And by this, it's everything. It's the friends that you make, the activities you do, the food you eat. Do you buy your food daily because you're walking around the city, or do you go American style and buy your food for a week because you shop at this big, huge supermarket, and you take your car and you can pack as much as you want. So these little things of life, of the place you choose to live, really changes. I mean, you might not notice it, but it changes a lot of these little daily activities that you do, and what we consume. So this is for me my personal ecosystem that I'm thinking about lately. Yeah.
And now in Germany, we say now you put the soccer ball on the penalty point, because then I would recommend to use our structure, our life areas, to plan exactly that, because you can also use that with these different categories to evaluate best spots to live either today and in the future, and to adapt that also for a personal setting, the ecosystem strategy map, which I sometimes now heard from people who just wrote me, hey, I use that also for my personal life planning, and probably I will also write that down into an article, because you can do so. But that's just as a little bit also humoristic remark, but I think there is definitely something in. But first of all, Matthew, thank you so much for these great insights. I mean, we are now really a little bit running out of time, but so many great thoughts. That's why I didn't interrupt it. And I hope also the audience will like them, will discuss with us. And once again, thank you so much for being here in this virtual session. And yeah, see you next, then maybe also once again later in the real world. So bye-bye.
Perfect. Thank you.